Good afternoon, boys and girls. Welcome to Teaching in Room 9. My name is Mrs. Crawford, and you might recognize me from the spring and summer when I taught 4th grade math. So if we take a look, the title is Taking a Stand. So this week, we're going to be looking at the purpose of laws and rules. Where do our laws and rules come from? Their origins. We're going to look at two definitions: racial discrimination and segregation, and we're going to examine and watch primary sources and secondary sources, and we'll talk about what that is in a second. And then we'll learn how children, students, and other young people affected change in laws then and now. So before we start, let's get some groundwork here about what primary sources are and secondary sources. So when we think about primary sources, I have a bit of a definition here for you. It says original records from a historical period, okay? So we're talking about diaries, letters, journals, pictures, newspaper articles. Those are all from a time period when we're pulling it right from the time period. When we talk about secondary sources, we're talking about documentation or recordings or writings about a historical time period. So it's almost like being one step removed away from primary sources. And so secondary sources are like our textbooks at school and videos, or even some of the nonfiction books that you guys like to read. One of the things about secondary sources is they have to get their information from primary sources, which is why we say it's one step removed. So today we're going to look at some documents and some pictures and watch some videos. And so each time we bring up a different source of information, I'll let you know, is this something we're looking at as primary or secondary? And then after a while, I think you'll catch on and I'll start asking you. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and start our lesson. And we're gonna start with school and classroom rules. So for a lot of us, school has started. It looks a little different for some people because some schools are going virtual. So there's kids at home learning online. And then some kids are in the classroom learning. But no matter what type of learning and where you're doing that right now, we all have some sort of rules at our school, in our classroom, on our Zooms, on our Teams, on our Google Meets. So let's talk about what are some of the rules you guys have at school. So give me one rule you have. Okay, so first, rule number 1, right? Everyone has this rule. No talking when someone else is talking, right? Wow. So as we're writing these, let's think about, why do we even have these rules? So why would we have a rule about no talking when other people are talking, when others are speaking? I think that's what teachers say. No talking when others are speaking, right? So why would we have that type of rule? Yeah, it's a rule that is getting us to be respectful of each other. Okay, what's another rule? Yeah, that keep your hands and feet and other objects to yourself. Yeah, that's that no hitting rule. So let's see. Keep your hands, feet, and other objects to yourself. Why do we have a rule about not hitting or keeping our hands, feet, and objects to ourselves? Yeah, because we don't want to hurt or harm someone, right? So let's look at what's a third rule you have. Yeah, do your work. Turn in your work on time, right? Do your best. Why do we put that? Do your best work. And turn it in on time. Why do we have a thing about doing our best work and turning it in on time? Yeah, so that we learn to stay organized, that we learn to excel, right? So that we learn to be able to keep up and have good study habits. All right, can you think of another one? Yeah. Raise your hand to speak. Why do we have, especially during like lessons, and if you're having a discussion or working in small groups, you don't usually have to raise your hand. But why during a lesson do you need to raise your hand to speak? Yeah, because you don't want everybody talking at the same time. Nobody's ideas and no one's voice gets heard, right? Everybody's shouting at the teacher something. I'm going to give the fifth one. This is one that my students and I have. Ask for help, be a help. Why do you think we might have one that says ask for help and be a help? Yeah, because if we're asking for help, that means that everybody at some point in time needs some help, and we can get answers to our questions so that we know. And that's why we go to school, is to know, right? Why do you think we have one that says be a help? Yeah, that gets into that citizenship type of thing, right? Be a good citizen at school. If you see someone that needs help, offer help. Or if they ask for help, be willing and ready to give them help. And then that golden rule kind of plays into this, right? Treat everyone how you want to be treated. If you have some questions, you would want somebody to answer that for you. All right, so let's look at our rules here. At your school, do these rules apply to everyone? Yeah, they do. So overall, we talked about individually why we have these rules, but why do you think we have them collectively or have them all together? Why do you think it's important that every teacher is doing this? Why do you think every teacher is setting school rules and classroom rules? Yeah, it keeps order, keeps down chaos. Everybody knows what they're supposed to do, so that's called knowing the expectation. What else does it do? Yeah, it makes sure that things are fair or things are equal, right? So that's why we have those rules. Do any of these rules apply outside of school? Like it's something that you would take into the community or into our cities or states or into even our nation? Yeah, definitely the keep your hands to yourself, right? If we're looking at it on a large scale, rules about keeping your hands to yourself, not hurting other people, right? Not assaulting anyone else, right? That's usually the big one that we have that we can apply. But some of these others we could apply in other places. Like if you're at church or a synagogue or a temple or you're at some kind of ceremony, are you talking when other people are talking? Usually, no. There's a time and a place for certain things, right? When you are maybe doing piano recitals or some kind of instrumental recitals, or you're in practice for your sports or your activities, don't you have a rule or an expectation about doing your best work and being on time, right? Keeping that organization. So our classroom and school rules apply in a larger sense. So where do we get this thing about having rules? Where does that come from? Well, that's origins. Origins is like origination, originating from. So our origins of rules and laws that we have in our country come from our U.S. Constitution and Declaration of Independence. Remember we talked about primary sources, right? I could not find my copy of the Constitution. You guys seen it? So I got this poster though. I do have a poster. And have you seen this type of paper? So this is a replica of the Declaration of Independence. And here we have all the founding fathers is what they call these men down here that signed it. And it's basically stating in Congress on July 4th, 1776, that the United States declares itself free of being under British rule, under British laws, right? So in doing that, they also created a constitution. Okay, so when we're looking at the Constitution, it is the basis for all our laws in the U.S. Constitution is supposed to give us legal grounds for equality. Now, when we look at the word equality, do you see any other words in there? Yeah, equal, right? So equality and for our rights. The beginning of the Constitution is the preamble, and the preamble is kind of like the introductory paragraph. You probably have already learned about that in your lessons in school. It's the introductory paragraph that lays down that equality is for all citizens. And then it goes further, and it has amendments, and it has the Bill of Rights, you know, your right to speak, your right to assemble, lots of different, they have 10 Bill of Rights. And then they have amendments. And amendments had to come about because as time went along, there were certain things that were missing from the Constitution, and more importantly, there were certain people that weren't accounted for when the Constitution was made. And so there had to be amendments. Amendments means we're going to add something or change something. So they added a 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And those amendments guaranteed citizenship rights for African Americans, because when the Constitution was made, African Americans in the United States, for the most part, were enslaved. And being enslaved, they were not counted as being equal or having individual rights. And so that's what the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment was supposed to do. It was supposed to guarantee African Americans rights under the Constitution that were not there when the Declaration of Independence was originally created and signed. So if this was on this type of paper in my hand and not on a poster, this would be a primary source. Because it's here on this poster, this would make it a secondary source. So this is documentation and information pulled for us to learn from that is from firsthand account here. And then you'll see on the back of here, it gives us some other activities you can do with it. Okay? So that's a lot. That's a handful right there. So let's talk about how we get the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Why would that be necessary? So we have two words here: racial discrimination, and then we have segregation laws and Jim Crow laws. Okay? So racial discrimination is the denial of a person's constitutional rights based on simply the color of their skin. And that's what happened with African Americans. And so because they had this racial discrimination against African Americans, there were actually legal ways to separate blacks and whites, and in particular to exclude blacks from not only their rights, but from full participation in our country. Okay? So we talk about the rights, like the right to vote, right? The right to eat where you want to eat, and the right to go to schools that are equitable, are equal for all students to be able to learn. And so that segregation laws and Jim Crow laws were the legal way that they were able to discriminate against African Americans. So it sounds like a lot. Let's take a look at a primary source Okay, so this is from Birmingham, Alabama, and it is a primary source because this is an actual copy of Birmingham's racial segregation ordinance. Ordinance is another name for like laws or rules, right? And so they have lots of different sections here, but you see that they have separation of races, and it tells you in this particular paragraph what they mean by that. So this first paragraph says that it's unlawful to conduct a restaurant or other place for serving food in the city at which white and colored people, and that's what they call black people then, were served in the same room unless such white and colored persons are effectively separated by a solid partition. So it's saying that blacks and whites can't eat in the same room unless there's a way to separate them. Okay, let's go down. There was another one here. Here's another one for separation of races. It's unlawful for any person in charge or control of a room, a hall, a theater, a picture house, auditorium, yard, court, ballpark, public park, or other indoor or outdoor places to which both white persons and Negroes, which is another name they call for black people, are admitted to cause permit or allow thereon theatrical. In other words, this is saying that black people and white people cannot be in the same public places. No movie theaters, no baseball parks, no restaurant, no public libraries. None of that can be done so that they can be together. Let's look at another one. That they can't even play together or in the company of each other at a game, that they are in operations on streetcars, they can't be together. So when we're looking at this, we're looking at all types of things that people do on a daily basis where we have laws that separate and exclude based on someone's skin color, okay? So that's what it looks like there. I found some pictures of, so these are going to be another primary source. So here we have a photograph of an African American going into a colored entrance in the Crescent Theater in Mississippi. And so you'll see that this entrance right here, 10 cents to go to the movies, believe it or not. But black people had to sit in the balcony while white people went in through a main entrance down on the first level. Okay. And here, we hear about this often, right? The water fountain that has colored over it because it's the one for black or African Americans to use. And then there's another water fountain, usually something that is nicer than the one that's there. But here we have the boy that's using the water fountain that is just for colored people to use, okay? And so those were laws, and that's the way the laws were. So what happens when people are tired of being treated that way? When are they tired of the laws the way they are, and what do they do about it? And so we have some examples of what can happen when people are tired of the laws. Now this one, primary source that a lot of us are familiar with. Anybody heard of Rosa Parks? Yeah. So this is the actual police report from when Rosa Parks sat on the bus and refused to move to another seat when she was told to. So this is the police department of the city of Montgomery, Alabama, and the person who filed the complaint, and listen to the complaint, where he received a call. Upon arrival, the bus operator said he had a colored female sitting in the white section of the bus and would not move back. We also saw her, we being the police officers, Day and Mixon. The bus operator signed a warrant for her, Rosa Parks, 634 Cleveland Court. Rosa Parks was charged with Chapter 6, Section 11 of the Montgomery City Code, and they had her warrant there. So this is the actual documentation of Rosa Parks' arrest. Okay, so let's look at that video and see what that was like for the two of them as they went up against racial discrimination and laws. And Mrs. Newsom will talk about the laws that she noticed that needed to change.
When I saw you climb that flagpole and take that flag down, I said, she handles things directly.
I've read about you in history books, I have seen you in documentaries, and I mean, your work has been such an inspiration to me, so it just truly is an honor to meet you. How did you get started in activism?
I was a student at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee in 1959. I felt outraged when I obeyed segregation signs, so I started looking for an organization that was trying to combat segregation. I found James Lawson's workshops. He was teaching community people and students, anyone who wanted to come, Gandhi's philosophy and strategy of nonviolence. I was at the right place at the right time and got an excellent education, and from there I took part in the sit-ins and later the freedom rides. Bree, how did you become an activist?
For me, it wasn't that I said to myself, okay, I'm going to be an activist. It was that I witnessed an injustice. The U.S. Supreme Court struck down key parts of the Voting Rights Act. And then at that same time, while that was going on, we had the Trayvon Martin case. And so it was this strange kind of juxtaposition of this attack on voting rights and this modern day Emmett Till. And I said, I need to take action. You are obviously an outspoken Black woman and organized.
So I'm gonna go forward some, and I wish we had the time to watch it all, but I want you to go here, and we're gonna hear more from Mrs. Nash about her work.
Position, sometimes they had to respect my work.
Particularly with the civil rights movement, everybody knows kind of like the key events, you know, key people, but the movement as it existed really was a lot of everyday people, right? The foot soldiers of the movement. Can you speak a little bit more about to that reality of how things happened?
It was ordinary people who did everything. The local dentist took over the task of being the movement's accountant. The history books that we have in school talk a lot about wars, generals, presidents. They say very little about the history that citizens make. The truth is that ordinary citizens make history.
In the lead up to scaling the flagpole, when I reflected on to what extent the rights that I have today is because of the courage that you all exercised in your time. I mean, that was a large part of what gave me the courage to do what I did.
All right, so there we have Miss Nash, who was in the 60s, and Miss Newsom, who was 2015, and they are still fighting laws that we're going to take away an individual's rights. So we see that they did things like here, doing marches. It didn't always go well. We have John Lewis here, right? And we have a letter to President John F. Kennedy in 1963 from a child who is asking him to please send in help so that they can integrate the schools. right? It takes a lot of work to get those things done. I want you to think about this. New rules. What if these were our new rules? How would you feel? First new rule. Third graders are not allowed to go to recess. Third graders cannot use the public library. Third graders cannot eat in the cafeteria, must eat at your desk. Third graders cannot ride the bus to and from school. Third graders cannot use the bathrooms and fountains by the classrooms, must go to the ones farthest away. How would you feel? You would be mad. What else? How else would you feel? You think it's unfair. You would feel left out. Very good. Left out. Sad. So the next question is, if these were our rules, and this is how you're feeling about it, it's unfair, it makes you sad, mad, left out, what would you do to change them? That's what we want to remember, okay? So as we leave, I want you to think about, as young citizens, what stands can you take when you see things that are unfair, unjust, and unequal? All right, I'll see you guys next week for more social studies and teaching in room 9.
Teaching in Room 9 is made possible with support of Bank of America, Dana Brown Charitable Trust, Emerson, and viewers like you.